mute button.
Oh no, don't worry, we've all been there before.
Oh my God, this is crazy. But what's funny is that it becomes a green room, and I get to learn a little about you, so
Okay.
I can better ask those questions.
All right.
So I all right. So I'm gonna just start it back from the top. Welcome to a new episode of Hacks and Hobbies. In this episode, we get to speak with James Mulvaney. Hey, James. Thanks for coming on to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
James, it was really cool connecting with you in the green room. And we initially met on matchmaker.fm. Now, you might be wondering, wait, why do you need a matchmaker to talk to somebody? It's not like match.com. And what's funny is that I was looking through some of the messages on my phone and it said matchmaker. And my wife's like, what are you doing on a matchmaker site? So tell us a little bit about matchmaker.fm. How did it get started?
Yeah, so matchmaker.fm we built it like Tinder, but for podcasters. So it's a networking site. You can connect with people who are looking to get booked on shows if you're a podcaster, or if you're, an expert in a certain field, or you're looking to grow your personal brand, or maybe you're an entrepreneur and you've just launched a new product. Getting booked onto other people's podcasts is a really good way of, building awareness and also having some really interesting conversations, I think, too.
Absolutely. So where did the concept for Matchmaker come from? We had talked a little bit about in the green room that you have two companies, podcast.co and radio.co.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so radio.co we launched in 2015, which is a live streaming platform for radio stations. More recently, we launched podcast.co last year. And when we were in the kind of the gear up to the launch, we were looking at different ways to market the service. Podcast.go is a platform to make it easy to start a podcast. So we were looking at the sort of podcasting space. And one of the things we noticed is around 60% of podcasts are based on having guests or interviewing people. And, it seemed like a good idea, a good funnel for us to sort of attract people, because a lot of people who are looking to be guests on podcasts then end up starting their own podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So to start off with, rather than spending time writing any code, we literally created two sort of landing pages on the podcast.co site. One was aimed at podcasters. So it's like, if you've got a podcast and you're looking for great guests, please fill out this form. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, what sort of guests you're looking for. And the other page was aimed at guests, so if you're an entrepreneur or a public speaker, or, you're an author, or you're looking to kind of get featured on podcasts for whatever reason, tell us about your areas of expertise and what you've got to offer. And, we just had two Google forms, so the exercise probably took us, like half a day just to kind of structure these forms. And what we would notice very quickly is, number one, we were getting lots of responses. Number two, the responses were really quite detailed. So people were actually spending time filling out effectively like a profile of themselves just on this form. And back then, we didn't really have any way of connecting these two people, but kind of this was just basically just to validate the idea. So we could say, what we've got, 100 people on this one list and 100 other people on this other list. Now we just need some way to actually connect the two together. So we sat down with our designer, and we kind of just explained the process. And we said, look, we kind of want to create almost like a Tinder style thing for podcasters. In the original designs, we even had like a swipe left, swipe right style interface just for fun, because we thought it would be like a good marketing thing. We didn't end up actually building that, but what we did do is create a product which basically allows people to connect very easily with guests. And so far, the results have been great. We launched the product in February 2020, so February this year. So it's only been live really for 3 or 4 months. We've already got over 3,500 users on there. So
3,500 in about what would you say
months.
3 months?
Yeah, like March, April, May, basically. Yeah.
Wow, that's really powerful. And I've been on another network called Spot a Guest for about a year and a half, and they recently launched a community using Mighty Networks, and I think they're around 3,000 also.
Yeah.
And then initially it started out as an email list. So you would go fill out a form, and then you would get an email from every week these are the people looking to be guests on podcasts. So that was pretty neat. And I actually got some guests through that network, and build my network and guest list through that as well. So Matchmaker has been really good so far. I've got one, two, three, about 8 people, 8 guests
Wow,
on my podcast through that.
great.
So it is working.
Yeah, I mean, it's really great. And for me as an entrepreneur, I find that massively rewarding because people are coming to us and saying, I've signed up and within 24 hours, I've got booked on a podcast. I can't believe this.
Yeah.
So it works from both sides of the kind of fence, because someone who's looking to be a guest, they can easily get in touch with, a dozen podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And currently I'm, hence one of the reasons we're talking, I'm actually embarking on a challenge myself. I've set myself a challenge of getting booked on 30 podcasts in 30 days on Matchmaker. I've got a few days left now. This is number 22, I think, or number 23.
Nice. That is an excellent way to market your service, your podcast, and
Yeah.
whatever's you're running. In fact, one of my friends that had a guest on my podcast, his name's what's his name? Jordan. So Jordan went on a 90-day challenge where for 90 days he was like, "I'm just gonna do 90 podcast episodes to
Yeah.
promote his Cloud9, you know, uh, authentic living." And I think he also had a book coming out around the same time.
Oh, cool.
So podcast is an amazing way to get out there. Plus, it's growing so fast. I mean, we just 3-4 years ago we only had 200 to 300,000 podcasts,
Yeah.
and just in 2017 or 2018 we had 600,000 brand new podcasts. And now you mentioned earlier in the green
Yeah.
room that they've passed the million mark.
They passed, yeah, both Spotify and Apple have announced they have a million. So, it's an exciting place to be. But if you think about a million podcasts compared to the number of YouTube channels, say, it's a very small number. So I still think there's a lot of opportunity. A lot of people come to me and say, "Oh, is it too late to start podcasting? There's already too many out there." Well, actually, when you think about it like that, it's still quite a small number.
Absolutely. And everybody has their own voice. So if they do want to start a podcast, please do, because there's only one of you. And that's what I tell everybody,
Yeah.
that there's only one of you. Just go out and create your podcast, fulfill your passion,
Uh-huh.
whatever your podcast is going to be about. Just go out there and create it. Because just like back in the 90s when there were people creating websites and blog posts, and in 2000s, the blogs this blew up with Blogster, with what was that, Blogger, because people were just creating blogs just to create content and build up what their thought process was.
Yeah, I agree.
Podcasts
I
are the
mean,
same. Hmm.
and as well, I think there's different reasons people go into podcasting. Obviously, we work with a lot of brands and corporate clients who are doing it as a way to sort of increase leads into their business, or build better relationships with their customers. But then also, there's lots of people who just do podcasting as a hobby, really, and just for fun. And I think there's no harm in doing that if you're just going into it just to have some interesting conversations and meet some new people, and provide some kind of entertainment or education for your audience. I think that's great.
Absolutely. In fact, I started this podcast, Hacks and Hobbies,
Yeah,
as a hobby.
exactly.
And it's been an amazing journey so far. In season 3, we've got to talk to some amazing folks like yourself. And what's really interesting is that the concentration of how you build a podcast and what it really takes to get started. And there's a ton of different ways. And I think one of your sites, podcast.co,
Mm.
so that started last year, correct?
Yeah, we launched podcast.co probably in 2018.
Okay.
Um, Before we had anything to sell, we launched it as really like a kind of just to get the marketing going and get some
Hmm.
content out there, so we could start building the brand. So we launched,
Yeah.
as I say, initially there was nothing to sell. It was really just an information resource for podcasters, and we've obviously now launched the platform on top of that.
Nice. That is awesome. So tell me a little bit about yourself, James Mulvaney. Where do you come from? Where do you hail from? How did you get started in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So my story began when I was like 16 years old. I was looking to go into radio as a DJ, as a presenter, and I wanted to, be behind the microphone. Always loved doing that. Started getting some experience in radio stations, had a few little shows online and stuff. And I was always fascinated by the idea that, I could start a show and sort of broadcast to my friends and how that process worked. How do you stream audio online? And this was back in like 2002, 2003,
Mm,
2004, when I was sort of finishing high school.
yeah.
And yeah, I kind of then also was like had an interest in building websites, and I was teaching myself to code PHP. So I kind of ended up putting the two together. I worked with I went off to university and started a business called Wave Streaming, which was based on the Shoutcast platform, which I know we were just talking about
Mm,
before, owned by AOL, part of Winamp, kind of legacy software from the 90s. But they hadn't really done much with it. So I was started building like tools and features that kind of bolted onto Shoutcast. And we started doing well as a business. I kind of finished university and I was in a fortunate position. I didn't have to go and get a job working for someone because the business was generating revenue, so I could just continue growing it.
yeah.
Um, Back then, I really wore lots of hats. I was writing the code, I was talking to customers, I was doing sales, I was designing the website. But I was probably kind of a bit of a jack of all trades and master of none. So I then started hiring staff who kind of knew better than I did, and started growing it from a business that was, like a side project for me to actually something that was quite successful. We then actually formed a partnership with AOL to promote Shoutcast and worked with them for a number of years in doing so. That deal came to an end when they sold that part of their business to another
Mhm.
company who didn't want to work with us. So
Yeah.
that was fine. So that was the kind of reset button. At that point, I thought, right, what's next? And that's really where the idea for radio.co came about.
Nice. So Radio.co has over about 4,000 channels around the world, correct?
Yeah, so I think we're probably pushing close to 5,000 now, but we have a
Nice.
lot of customers broadcasting from all countries, in every corner of the globe. So we've got lots of customers in the USA, but we've got customers in India, Africa, obviously
Hmm.
all throughout Europe,
Yeah.
and a complete range of types of customers. It's a really exciting business to run.
So how does somebody launch a radio station, and how do you differentiate that with, from podcasting?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think podcast is almost like an evolution of radio in a sense, but the difference really between radio and podcast is a podcast is something that you download, you can listen to it from the beginning to the end, and radio you tune in and you listen to what's happening right now. They're obviously very similar mediums. I
Hmm.
think, interestingly, since lockdown happened, we've seen a big hike in radio listening across all of our clients' stations. We've seen probably 50% extra traffic at peak times because people like that kind of human connection. I think the knowledge that it's live and the knowledge that what someone is saying is happening there and then is kind of what gives people that human connection. I think
Yeah.
podcasts are great too, but I still think the thing with audio in general across both platforms is, it's a personal form of communication. It
Yeah.
feels like you're there with that person, and it's when you're watching stuff on TV or video, it's a bit more like you're looking into them rather than sort of being there with them. I think that's kind of
Hmm.
the difference between audio and video.
No, you make a great point there. And I was actually going to ask, what type of numbers have you seen now that we're in lockdown and everybody's live streaming and Zooming? And,
Yes.
have you seen more customers jump in to start a radio station even?
Yeah, we've seen drastic increase in signups. Started happening in February, March
Hmm.
time. It's leveled out a little bit now, but
Yeah.
March and April were really like hot months. We had a lot of new customers signing up,
Nice.
and we actually had to hire some more customer success reps to to sort of help on board all these new customers, which was great as well.
Yeah. Now, you made a really good point how a podcast is almost like a radio you can take into your pocket,
Yeah.
and you can download it, listen to from the start to beginning. And if you compare it podcast, it's almost like a YouTube video that you can download and watch from, beginning to end. It's almost like video on demand.
Of course.
But what's making a comeback with COVID situation is that live shows on Facebook and YouTube have picked up a lot of steam. In
Yes.
fact, the capture cards and cameras that are on sale right now or unavailable to, back ordered by the masses is so huge. It's insane.
Mm. It's interesting. Yeah.
So what's interesting is radio evolved into a podcast, and now video is evolving into a live TV show that people can run from their homes.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting contrast. Like, okay, people want to be connected live with somebody who's creating content, so then they can also interact, they can comment, and what's funny is that LinkedIn Live video just launched almost a year ago,
Yeah.
and it's been getting a lot of ticks, and people are just in the comments and connecting with the people that are talking on video.
Mm.
So with the radio, I'm guessing it's a similar thing. They're listening in, and they're probably have a way to call in as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have a talk feature, so you can have guests on your show as part of our platform.
Mm-hmm.
But also, people are using it. It's one of these things. It's a great project to do at the moment. You
Yeah,
can devote a lot of time to create great content, playlisting different songs, and all this kind of thing. So I think people are really kind of engaged with the medium at the moment.
absolutely. They just need something to do, because there's so much pre-recorded shows that you can watch. You want more spontaneity and
Yeah,
more uncertainty, so
yeah.
to say.
I mean, I think also, the way the internet's changed. Like, if this lockdown happened 10 years ago, it would be totally different
Oh
to
my
to,
god.
to now. I think it's good. I think the fact that these kind of communication tools, Zoom and radio, podcasting, and video chat, and all these live streaming functionalities are available
Yeah,
on like a wide range of platforms, just make the whole thing really accessible to everyone.
it has. It's almost like a blessing to, you're connected to the internet. You're getting all the data that's going on all around the world, but then you're
Yeah,
also, you know connecting with your loved ones. You're doing all sorts of silly things, and now it's normal and okay for a child to walk into a Zoom call.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So James, tell me, what can how what is it that we're trying to what's my question supposed? I'm trying to formulate a question. Like, what can somebody take away from this episode of our podcast? What can you teach my audience, um, either in the podcasting space or the radio space? What's the takeaway that you would like people to take?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll speak about podcasting because it's more. I think it's got a wider appeal, like generally to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Two things. So, firstly, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, but maybe you're not sure if you want to jump in straight away, if you sign up to Matchmaker as a guest and get some experience appearing on other people's podcasts, it's a great way to kind of test the water, see how you kind of act, test your responsiveness to people's questions. And I think, being a guest on someone else's podcast is a great way to go if you're not really ready to take the plunge into starting your own podcast just yet. Also, the benefits I mentioned before, think about how many audiences you can potentially expose yourself to who otherwise wouldn't know about you. So that's the first thing. Secondly, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, excuse me,
Mhm.
if you're thinking about starting a podcast, the best thing to do is actually just start. There's too many people that come to us and they're like, yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. It's like, okay, 2 weeks later, have you done anything yet? No, I'm still thinking about it. Actually, just starting is the first step that you need to do. It doesn't matter if the first episode or your first season is not perfect. There's always time to reiterate, and you're going to be continually improving and continually making yourself better, and becoming a better interviewer as well. Especially if your podcast is going to be based on hosting guests. So I think those kind of the sort of key takeaways here. If you want to kind of get experience, be a guest first, and then secondly, just start. Don't worry about it too much. Don't worry about the technical side of things, because it's not actually that complicated. You just need to get your first episode out there and start gaining some traction.
Absolutely. You're so right. The first step into starting anything is to just
Yes.
get started. Don't worry
Yep.
about what's available.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where technology is in our hands, more powerful than supercomputers, back in the days. In fact, my first episode or my first season was entirely recorded on my iPhone and my iPad while I was driving back and forth from and to work.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So my first episode was, and I discovered the Anchor.fm app,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh my God, this is so much easier, because I had a podcast launched in 2012 where we
Mhm.
used, I think we used Hangouts meeting on the computer, and it was a 3 people show. My co-host were my cousins, and then it was really interesting because we would launch this online, essentially a Zoom meeting that would broadcast on YouTube. Of course, we didn't
Yeah.
have any people watching on YouTube, but we just talked, and we took the audio from it and made that as the episode, podcast episode. So
Sure.
that was my first podcast back in 2012, and it was very cumbersome.
Yeah.
But now it's so much easier. So tell us a little bit about your podcast.co and how can somebody get started using your uh, service.
Sure. I mean, podcast.co makes it super simple to set up a podcast. If you've got your episode recorded, it's just a case of just dragging and dropping. It uploads. We handle a submission to all the major directories. So we'll submit it to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and many others on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Um, We've got lots of value added cool tools, like you can create video from your podcast. You can also transcribe it using AI into text, which is great for repurposing. You can take quotes out for social media, turn it into a blog post. So check out podcast.co. That's the website. And as I mentioned before, if you're interested in getting booked as a guest and growing your personal brand, matchmaker.fm is the one.
Fantastic. So we've got podcast.co that'll help you get started with your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to bring guests on or be a guest, and I think one thing that you mentioned, if you want to get started and you want to be testing the waters, and like you said, you talk to somebody and they're like, yeah, we're going to start a podcast, but then weeks later they're still figuring out what hardware they need to buy. They're still doing all the analysis paralysis. But I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
it's really good to jump on and say, hey, I want to be a guest on the podcast. I have an
Yeah.
experience, I have an expertise that I can talk about, and test those waters. That's a really excellent point.
Cool.
Now, what's interesting is I didn't do that. I was like, I'm just gonna start recording, and I took it from Gary Vaynerchuk. He's like, if you want to create anything, just get started, and don't think about what you're gonna talk about. Just think about the journey that you're taking. So document the process. So I started documenting my beekeeping process, my
Yeah.
beekeeping hobby, and that became my first season. So I'm
Uh-huh.
talking about beekeeping, how do how do you set up your hives, how do you set up your frames, the bee biology, everything beekeeping related. And people were like, what, wait, you're a beekeeper? You're the first beekeeper I've ever talked to before. So that was really an exciting journey. Again, it's important to get started,
Mm.
and podcast.co's got your back covered, because submitting and setting up stuff on different platforms can be another huge friction point, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially the cumbersome process of setting up on Google Podcasts. I still don't know how to set it up on Google Podcasts, an episode, my own podcast. If I wanted to start from scratch, I mean, using Anchor.fm, you're using the similar process of syndicating the podcast to the different other platforms. But
Mm.
of course, you also have experience from the radio network, and working with different software, and building stuff up on top of that. So that's really awesome. All right. At this point in the podcast, I'd like to ask some questions to my guests. Are you
All right.
ready?
I
All
hope
right.
so.
Okay. So, what is the one hobby that you wish you got into?
I used to do woodworking when I was growing up. I
Hmm.
used to like making furniture and building stuff, and not done any now for years. But that's kind of like one of the things I want to go back to at some point in my life. Yeah.
Nice. I love woodworking as well. And when I got into beekeeping, and then when I first got my first hive, they're like, all right, you have to assemble all of this pieces
Yeah.
together. And so I had a passion for that. I was like, all right, let me, put this on down. So woodworking is one of my top ones. In fact, I follow a lot of Instagram folks and on TikTok, different woodworkers and how they make, how they're either refreshing, furniture or putting things together. It's really fascinating to watch. Next question. What did you want to be when you were a child?
That's a good question. I don't really remember, to be honest. I used to love when we were doing school productions, like theatre shows. I love the backstage stuff, so like lighting and sound. So again, it probably kind of links into the DJ thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've always kind of had a fascination with technology, electronics, that sort of thing.
So you're almost saying that you are doing what you wanted to do as a child.
I guess so. In a weird, different way. It's probably not exactly. I was a kid in the '90s, so the internet was sort of in its infancy.
Hmm.
So I didn't look at tech entre. Kids growing up now will look at like Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, Jeff Bezos. I didn't look up to like people like that and think, oh, look, they're tech entrepreneurs. That's where I want to go. But
Yeah.
yeah, I always had an interest in the behind the scenes stuff and figuring out how things work. So I guess it's kind of in a sense that's really what I've ended up doing. Yeah.
Nice. That's really cool.
Yep.
All right. Next up, what is your favorite movie or TV show?
That's a good question. I don't have a. I can't say. I can't just give you one answer there.
Hmm.
So pass, I guess. I'm just trying to think. The last film I watched it was Richard Jewell, which was pretty good.
All
Is it
right.
Richard Jewell or Robert Jewell?
Robert. I have to say I don't know that movie. Would
Yeah.
you pick a book if you had a choice to pick your favorite book?
Two business books I read when I was kind of young were Rich Dad Poor Dad and 4 Hour
Mm.
Work Week. I thought they were both really inspirational, and they were pretty cool.
Yeah, Rich Dad Poor Dad was a really good one for me. It changed the mindset for me.
Yeah, same. I think it's a
And I was
really
like, holy smokes, what? Really? That's
yeah.
that's what the world is made of? So that must have been a really good milestone for yourself, right? To be reading that book and then getting into creating something that you love to do and
Yep.
then watching it prosper. Nice.
Totally, yeah. And also, the one thing I learned from Rich Dad Poor Dad is just a bit about investing as well. I've got a few properties that I've invested in now, and various other investments. So that's kind of the main thing I learned from that.
Nice. Nice. I like it. All right. This next question is also movie related. So I'm sure you've seen a ton of movie over the past few decades.
Okay, yeah.
What movie would you choose if you got to play a character in it?
Oh, I don't know. Probably like one of these goofy movies from the mid 2000s.
Hmm.
Like when I was like a teenager and used to watch like American Pie and stuff. That was probably like, I don't know, one of those characters would be fun to play, I think.
That's a good one. So we'll put down American Pie,
Yeah.
the movie you want to play a character in it.
I don't know which character, but just someone in one of those
Someone in
films.
there. Okay.
Yeah. Or actually, there's another one called Kevin and Perry Go Large, which is fun. So yeah, one of those kind of like cheesy from the like early 2000s, the mid
Hmm.
2000s, something like around there.
All right, man. You're giving us a lot of shaky answers, but we'll take them for the time being. We'll leave it to the audience and to go bug you and ask you, hey, no, really, what character in American Pie would you want to be?
I can't remember the cat. Or the only character I remember is the main guy, which was Adam
Yeah,
Sandler, wasn't
nobody
it?
else. Yeah, exactly.
And
Nobody else.
a Stifler, and but I don't know that. So I don't know, one of those characters, whatever. They just think it's a good fun film.
Awesome. All right. Next question. This is one of my favorite ones. Who is your favorite superhero? And that's mainly because I love superheroes, and you can see back here.
Yeah, I don't like superheroes.
All right, if you don't like superheroes, which is totally
Joe,
fine.
I've been compared to Clark Kent before, so we'll go with Clark Kent.
All right, Mr. Clark Kent. The question that's kind of like in the same vein is, what would be your superhero power?
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? Be invisible or fly,
The
or
invisible
go back
fly.
in time. I don't know. There's two. There's two. So how about going back in time? There we go.
Awesome. Go back in time.
Yeah.
All right, last question. If you were a board game, what would
Uh-huh.
it be?
Monopoly.
Oh, man, been getting a lot of monopolies. I need to stir my game up. Thank you so much, James, for answering those questions as best as you could, even though you
No
had
problem.
no idea these questions were coming at you.
I'm always rubbish at these kind of questions anyway. I don't have like real sort of fascinations or obsessions with one film.
You
I'm
know
kind of
why
just
that is?
generalist rather than specialist. You know.
No, you are a specialist, my friend. You just don't see that because you're so deep into your own, podcast.co and, growing
Yeah.
radio.co and matchmaker. So what happens is, you're focused on these properties. These are your three children you're focusing on. And I know that because I have three kids,
Yep.
and if I didn't have any hobbies, I would go I'm not gonna say it, but they are amazing, and they take they take up your time. So, and then you don't have time for hobbies because I haven't biked. Like, what cycling is one of my hobbies, and I haven't
Mm.
biked in 2 years
Oh wow.
because I had a brand new 3-year-old,
Yeah.
brand new third baby. Um, so yeah, it's really fascinating getting to know you a little bit. um, you know, how you started at different companies, your little background on the amazing companies you were able to, form, and the partnerships that because that takes, you learn so much from those partnerships and those experiences
Mm.
that you've done,
Yeah.
able to, bring it all together and create your own amazing company. So, James, where can my audience find you?
Sure. So check out the sites, podcast.co, matchmaker.fm, radio.co. If you want to connect with me on social media, there's a page. If you go to James M, that's M for Mike,
Mhm.
jamesm.com/connect. That's all links to my different social profiles on there. I'm always creating lots of content as well about how to start podcasts, stuff to do with radio, and a bit of business advice as well.
Very awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. We will be sure to drop in the links and the show notes
All right.
to get connected with you. Thanks so much for your time. Have an
It's been a
amazing
great
day.
conversation. Thanks very much for having me.
Yes, it was certainly a great conversation, especially when we started talking, and I thought I had hit record, but I hit mute button, and I'm like going on. I'm like, I'm not getting any response from James. What is going on? And I look at the screen. I press the mute button, and I didn't even pay attention about the recording because it's so early in the morning, and
I know that's my fault.
it's been
Time zone
crazy.
differences.
Yeah, time differences. What's funny is that I've spoken to a lot of people over the pond, but
Yeah.
I still haven't had a chance to speak to somebody in Australia, because that time
Oh.
difference is even more crazier. There's a few entrepreneurs and influencers that I follow in Australia, and I've been trying
Uh-huh.
to get them on my podcast, and the time difference is just what kills me.
Yeah. You
But
just need to stay up really late,
I know, right?
or wake up in the middle of the night and just record one. I was chatting to an Australian guy a couple
uh
of weeks ago. So yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and sharing your journey. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much.